Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own.
Hey everyone, does one person have to be right in an argument, therefore someone else has to be wrong? Or do you sometimes struggle with conflicting emotions and you believe that if one emotion is true, then automatically you assume that the other is false? Binary or polarized thinking, where you believe that there's two opposite sides and you can only pick one, can lead to this either or mentality that keeps you stuck. The reality is that life is full of paradox, and two emotions and viewpoints and ideas can and absolutely do coexist. So, I'm Angie Miller, and this is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I really appreciate you joining my show, and I can't wait to deep dive into the gray areas where we embrace a both and versus an either or mindset. Both and thinking recognizes that two things can definitely be true at once. It leads us to have less conflict and less judgment toward other people, but also toward ourselves. And it frees us from these mental constraints and invites us to go into this mindset that is actually positive and accepting versus judgmental and polarizing. Both and recognizes again that different views, different ideas, different feelings can coexist. And because we have these different emotions, it doesn't mean that one emotion negates the other or that one has to be right so that the other has to be wrong. Today, we're going to talk about how to navigate this power of both and thinking. And my goal is that when we finish this conversation together, that we feel more centered and calm, and that we're aware of the paradox and the beauty of multiple emotions so that we can embrace different perspectives, both within us, but within the community of people that we surround ourselves with. Because the truth is, you know what? You can feel joy and heartbreak at the same time. You can feel confident and also feel insecure. You can also feel accomplished while also feeling unfulfilled. So, whether it's relationships or it's careers or it's these big existential questions, I hope that you'll finally feel liberated from oversimplified binary boxes and that will gain skills to navigate complexity with more acceptance. So, let's talk about what that looks like. What is a both and mindset exactly? And why is it so normal that two seemingly conflicting truths can coexist? So I'm going to start with the power of both and thinking to increase our psychological slash emotional flexibility. The ability to hold and accept two conflicting emotions, or maybe even more conflicting emotions. For example, happiness and sadness are simultaneously, is a sign of psychological and emotional flexibility. I feel like that's a tongue twister. And it's powerful at work, at home, and in everyday life because research supports that when we're emotionally or psychologically flexible, it drives down stress and anxiety. Specifically, research says that emotional flexibility or complexity, where you experience mixed emotions about one simple event, is associated actually with better mental health and well being. So, you know what? It's normal. It's normal to have a wide range of emotions. In fact, when you do, it means that you are emotionally flexible, which is a sign of better mental health and well being. So there was a study that found that people who could describe experiencing both positive and negative emotions at the same time scored higher on measures of resilience and the ability to recover from stressor. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat here. So, what does it look like to be emotionally flexible? A common example is when we feel excited and we feel nervous about a big event, like a wedding or a job interview. It's normal, right? You go in for this big job interview and you're super, super excited, but you're also very, very nervous. And you know what? That means that we're emotionally flexible. Of course, we're going to feel both of those emotions. It makes sense. Another one is that we can feel happiness and hopefulness, but also anxiety and fear about the unknown. So maybe we're going into this new job and we feel a lot of fear because we don't know what we're getting into, but we're also super happy and hopeful because we have this new opportunity on the horizon. But if we try to ignore or suppress one of those emotions, it actually increases our stress and it depletes our emotional resources. Because I've talked about this before, suppression doesn't work. It's like trying to put a lid on a boiling pot. We can't just shove down emotions because we say, oh, I don't want to feel that. So when you're going through a major life transition, for example, like let's say you're moving homes, it's normal to feel, healthy and also conflicting emotions. Like maybe you feel sad that you're leaving your old home and your neighborhood full of memories, but you also feel happiness and optimism over this opportunity that you have to live in a new location. Maybe you feel stress about the logistics and the cost of moving, but you also feel gratitude that you're in a financial position where you're able to make that transition. Maybe you feel excited about a major life change, but you're also nervous because of the adjustment period. Or maybe you feel grateful for your job, but you're also stressed by the long hours. Both can be true. You don't have to experience just one emotion. There's a great book out there called Emotional Agility, and it's by Susan David. And she says that when we hold paradoxical emotions, it allows us to more fully experience life and life's joys and life's complexities without judgment. Telling yourself you shouldn't feel sad because the move is actually exciting is actually going to increase your suffering. There was also a study by Smoley that found that people who accept and process a mix of emotions experience less depressive symptoms over time compared to those who insisted that they only needed to feel happiness. That's why all of that, just focus on the good or try to be happy or think positive. Those kind of memes or those kind of messages drive me absolutely crazy because if we're trying to suppress and say, I'm not supposed to feel negative emotion, we're not actually feeling the full range of human emotion. And that's what makes us mentally sound and mentally well. Because again, complex emotions are part of life. So basically, in summary, having this conflict of positive and negative emotions about major life events is psychologically normal and healthy. And I would also go so far as to say it doesn't have to be major life events, it could be everyday situations. But when we embrace the paradox, we reduce our suffering and we reduce that idea that we need to be rigid in our thoughts and that all emotions have to be either positive or negative. So that's the first one that I wanted to start with, which is that whole idea of being psychologically and emotionally flexible. Because to me, that is the foundation of what helps us to live a good kind of quality life where our emotions are allowed to go through the full range of emotion, kind of like when we're exercising and we go through the full range of motion in our exercise experience. So, a both and mindset can also help you build what they call cognitive flexibility. And that means that we are able to cognitively adapt our thoughts and our behavior to new situations. So, we're not able to just think flexibly, but we're also able to adapt our thoughts and our behaviors. So basically, when we have cognitive flexibility, we're able to consider multiple angles, which is a vital skill to help us improve problem solving and decision making, especially when we're living in times of uncertainty. It also helps us to build our resilience when we're under stress. So here's an example of cognitive flexibility. Let's say that when something isn't working, some people just get super rigid and they're like, no, this is my solution, and I insist on sticking to this solution, even when they start to recognize that that solution isn't working. But cognitive flexibility says that when something isn't working, you can change strategies. You can pivot without getting stuck. So let's say that you start with one approach to solve a problem, you see that it's not working. So rather than stubbornly digging in your heels and persisting down the same path, you change your approach and you move forward differently. Research supports that when you're able to embrace this kind of uncertainty and you can hold contradictory ideas, and unlocks creative thinking. So when we, embrace that uncertainty, we come up with more innovative solutions. So that's huge, right? Because if you're faced with a problem, and we are, let's face it, we don't go through a day where we don't run into a problem. To me, it's like, maps tells you to go a certain way to a destination. And you get to the destination and maps hasn't caught up with what's currently going on in your area. And so they don't recognize that there's construction. And so maps is telling you you need to keep going straight. If you're not cognitively flexible, you're like, no, you know what? I need to go through this, but there's barriers set up and there's people working. So obviously you can't. And that's a simplified example, but we have to be flexible in the way that we solve problems, whether we're at work or whether we're at home. So, cognitive flexibility is important when we're raising kids. It's important when we're at our jobs. It's important in any kind of behavior or situation that we run into that requires problem solving. So, a both and mindset also helps us improve or build cognitive empathy. So, cognitive empathy is different from cognitive flexibility because when we're talking about cognitive flexibility, we're talking about problem solving and being able to positively pivot during times of uncertainty and stress. But cognitive empathy is this ability to understand and validate multiple perspectives on an issue. But it could also be called perspective taking. And I feel like the thing is, I feel like perspective taking, we've kind of lost this art in our society. We've lost the art of seeing other people's perspective and stepping back and saying, okay, they think really, really different from me when it comes to things like politics, or they think really different from me when it comes to things like child rearing, or whatever all the big hot topics are in our society. But cognitive empathy or perspective taking is huge if we're going to get along with people. I mean, that's the bottom line. We can unfriend everybody who thinks differently from us politically. We can unfriend everybody who doesn't solve problems the way we solve problems or who doesn't raise kids the way we raise kids. And then, you know what? We're just going to surround ourselves with this little bubble of people who think like we do and live life exactly like us. And maybe that's comfortable for some people, but for me personally, and for a lot of us, we want to be surrounded by diversity, people who don't think like us, people who let us see life through a different lens, even if it's not a way that we would navigate life. It gives us perspective. And it helps us realize that, hey, maybe not everything they do is the way that we would do it, but maybe we could learn something from them and they could learn something from us. So in cognitive empathy, the bottom line is it involves less conflict, less judgment, and less mental constraints. Because if you're able to take someone else's perspective, if you're able to step outside of your own viewpoint and consider how it looks through their lens, through their upbringing and their background and their perspective, then you're able to be more empathic. You're able to do what they call walk in someone else's shoes. So, research supports that if we have more cognitive empathy or we're able to take on other people's perspective, we have less conflict in our relationships. Imagine that, right? So, we can get along with our neighbors, even if they put a political sign in their yard that is against what our political beliefs are. Or we can get along with our work partner who thinks very differently from we do about hot topics like child rearing. When we can validate another person's stance and we can recognize that they have valid beliefs and feelings, then it reduces our need to feel defensive and to take on this it's my way or the highway type of thinking. So let's say that there is this workplace disagreement. You're at work and you push someone's buttons or they push your buttons and you're having a disagreement. Let's say that they prioritize processes. Like they want to stick with what they know. Like this is the way we've always done this and they insist on being consistent. But let's say that you're this creative person and you're like, no, I have a much better workaround for this. I don't care if this is how we've done it for 20 years. I believe that my idea is more progressive and I want to take my thought on this and I want to move forward my way. Well, if we're able to take perspective or have cognitive empathy, then we can acknowledge that they are, they have good intentions and we have good intentions. Their way isn't wrong and our way isn't wrong. And it doesn't mean that one of our ways is right or better. It just means that we approach it from a different lens and a different angle. It doesn't mean that we always have to agree with the other person, but we get to recognize that there is this multidimensional reality to life and that two seemingly contradictory views can legitimately coexist based on different assumptions or value systems. So that's cognitive empathy. And I don't know about you, but I would love to see more cognitive empathy in our world. I would love to see more people going, hey, you know what? It's okay that you don't look at the world the way that I look at the world. It's okay that you don't make decisions the way that I would make decisions. My thought on that is thank goodness, right? Because I want the perspective. I want the nuance of seeing everyone around me and learning a little bit from them and them learning a little bit from me so that we can make the world a more accepting place. So, if you step outside of your mental constraints and you get out of this idea of how things should be, you open your mind to possibilities and you get to maybe not fully adopt someone else's point of view, but at least you get to see it through their lens and their angle. Perspective taking is huge to both and thinking. It avoids this need to make everything this oppositional either or dilemma where I pit my beliefs against your beliefs and somebody's got to be a winner and somebody's got to be a loser. So that is cognitive empathy. I'm Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. And I'm talking about the power of a both and mindset. Why two truths can both coexist and how both truths have validity. So, another way that both and thinking is important is it can help us in our relationships. And let's face it, our relationships are the backbone to our well being. A both and mindset can help all of us with something that we call mutual validation. In other words, in interpersonal relationships, both and thinking can reduce conflict and promote understanding by helping us acknowledge multiple viewpoints. And it's similar to cognitive empathy, but I'm specifically talking here about you being in a relationship with your kids, your partner, your spouse, somebody very close to you. So, John Gottman does a lot of research on marriages and partnerships, and probably the holy grail of research when it comes to couples. So, Gottman's research supports that in relationships, when you're able to validate each other's point of view and you're able to use both and thinking, it promotes greater understanding. You don't have to choose whose perspective is right. There doesn't have to be a winner and a loser, but you can validate one another's experiences. So here's an example of both and in a relationship. Let's say that a couple is disagreeing over how to discipline their child. And one says, I care about boundaries. And another says, well, I care about emotional support. And they can validate one another's mutual or one another's perspective on this situation, right? So one person might be more hardcore and say, hey, this is about setting healthy boundaries. And another person might say, yes, but I think it's about providing a lot of emotional support in this situation. So Gottman says that mutual validation means that in order for us to understand and respect each other, we have to validate each other's subjective experiences, even when they contradict one another. So, in other words, we have to acknowledge that my thoughts, my feelings, and my perspective make sense to me, and it is my truth based on my background and my current reality. And likewise, I have to validate that your thoughts, your feelings, and your perspective make sense to you. And you have a truth that you hold that is based on your background in your current reality. So at the end of the day, if you're in a partnership, you were each raised by two different sets of parents. You were raised by two families, two belief systems. So of course, you're going to have a different approach to child rearing, to money, to the whole situation. So here's some key aspects of mutual validation. Mutual validation would be separating subjective experience from objective truth. So realizing that multiple objective or multiple subjective realities can exist side by side without somebody being absolutely right. Right. So there is a subjective experience and then there is an objective truth. But at the end of the day, we all have our reality or how we perceive situations. And that is our truth, whether or not it's, quote, right or wrong. So, another aspect of mutual validations means that we empathically listen to understand versus to respond. I find myself saying this in my own partnership all the time. My husband will tell you I'm constantly saying, can you listen to validate, or can you listen to understand versus listening to argue or judge or to be right? Right? Think about how you're listening. Are you listening because you want to provide rebuttal? Are you listening because you want to win and prove that you're right? Or are you listening because you truly want to understand the other person's point of view? Again, you're not saying you agree, but you are saying you're willing to listen because you deeply respect and admire your partner. And that's huge. That's a mic drop right there. Mutual validation also says that we communicate acceptance for the other person's reality as being valid for them, even if we don't completely share that point of view. So, in other words, I can accept that that is my partner's reality, even if I don't share that point of view. Right. After 32 years of marriage, I've had to do a lot of this, and so has my partner, so has my husband, because my reality, even after 32 years of marriage, is still very deeply embedded in my belief system, which came long before him. And last but not least, just finding a kernel of truth in what the other person is expressing without getting derailed by the idea that you disagree. Therefore, you're going to dig your heels in and say, nope, that's my way or the highway. Maybe just find a kernel of truth, just this nugget of understanding. Even if you're looking at them like, I feel like you have six heads right now, and nothing about what is coming out of your mouth is making sense to me. Instead of saying that out loud, what if there is this little nugget of truth to what they're saying? Gottman's research found that couples who practiced mutual validation and avoided the impulse to contradict or to nullify, in other words, shut down the other person's emotional perspectives, were much, much better at de escalating conflict. Validation creates what we call psychological safety. You don't have to agree with me, but if you validate my experience, I feel safe with you. And if I feel safe with you, you are a friend for life or you are a partner for life. The alternative is this natural tendency where we want to shut down or nullify the other person, where we want to invalidate their experience as being wrong or misconceived because we say that it contradicts our perspective. In the end, mutual validation allows both people's emotional truths to coexist. It reduces this need that we have to get defensive and the need to fight over, our side of the story being right. It facilitates greater intimacy and understanding and conflict resolution. So, when we talk about this whole idea of two truths being able to coexist and this both and mindset, the things that I want you to kind of hold on to is that both and mindset improves psychological and emotional flexibility. And again, that psychological and emotional flexibility means that we can move through a wide range of thoughts and not shame ourselves for feeling two conflicting emotions about the same situation. A both and mindset also says that we are better at cognitive flexibility. So we're better at adapting to different situations or new situations and being able to take a different approach if our approach isn't working. A both and mindset also improves our cognitive empathy or our ability to take another person's perspective. So it leads to less conflict and judgment and mental constraints. And last but not least, a both and mindset promotes mutual validation, where we're able to acknowledge the validity of our partner or spouses or our significant other's viewpoint. We're able to accept that their truth is different from our truth, and we're able to find a nugget of truth in their truth so that we can validate them and say, "You are safe with me." So, thank you so much for joining me today on Strong Mind, Strong Body. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I always welcome your thoughts and your feedback about each of my shows. And have a wonderful week.